Hello, hello. We are with Dr. Aumatma Simmons, and we're going to talk about real healing when trying to conceive. Be with us till the end. Welcome to my show, Matma. I'm so happy to have you.
Uh,
Actually, we know each other for a long time, but we never talked, and
yeah.
that was a great opportunity. I love these connections because she's doing great. When I look at your bio and what you're doing and how much help you've done so far to so many people who are trying to conceive, I was like, oh, I have to talk to her.
Yeah, it's really lovely to be here, and I'm just happy to talk to you and kind of empower women on the journey that when they're trying to conceive, it's such a hard time.
Yeah,
So I really come from this place of like, how do we help people? How do we help?
exactly. So, oh, let me change this one. So, real healing with when trying to conceive. First, talk about yourself. How did you end up helping couples? I know you before you help this. I mean, you find your genre and
Mhm,
find fertility
mhm,
path. You already been a doctor,
mhm,
naturopath doctor. So
mhm.
how come you choose this path?
Yeah, so I had been a naturopathic doctor and um was going through really like my own journey with fertility, and I had married this man who I didn't want to have children with, didn't realize until he started talking about kids, and my uterus would literally like start screaming every time he talked about kids, and I was like, "Uh-oh, I think I married the wrong person." uh, and and then it was like 9 months where I just went into the research, started studying like crazy, because fertility is a very small section of what even naturopathic doctors learn in school. So essentially what I had remembered was fertility drops off a cliff at 35, and I was like, well, I'm running pretty close to that. So I need to figure out what I'm doing. And I came out of that. Most of the stuff that I researched was pretty hopeless, right? But I was like, there has to be something that natural medicine can offer. I really don't want to freeze my eggs. Even if I had the money, I couldn't freeze my eggs. So uh, I was like, okay, there has to be something. And it wasn't until I found that like glimmer of hope that I realized people in other parts of the world don't have this belief system that fertility drops off of a cliff at 35. So I said, okay, if everyone in the world doesn't believe this, if there are actually women around the world that can conceive whenever they choose, then why are we bound to this law? So I once I started questioning that, then everything else clicked into place, because then now I had a vision. Now I had the possibility that I could get pregnant after 35, and that drove me to like go deeper and deeper. And then before I knew it, people were like, oh, you can help me have a baby. And there were literally like 46-year-olds, and I was like, oh my god, no, I don't know what I'm doing. And people just kept coming, and finally the first person that I said yes to was 33. She had had 3 pregnancy losses. She was just an incredible person, but had just been through such a hard, traumatic journey. And she was like, I really want to work with you. I heard about you from someone. And I was like, how? I don't even talk about this. She's like, I really think you're the right person. And I was like, okay, here's why I'm not the right person, is essentially what I told her. And if you still think that you should work with me, call me on Monday. And she finally came in. She came in on Monday, and she was like, you're the craziest, weirdest doctor I've ever met. But I'm really clear. You're going to help me. I was like, okay, here we go. And 3 months later, she was pregnant. Um, Freaked out because she had all the pregnancy losses. All of her previous pregnancies had led to miscarriage. And then pretty soon after, like her first trimester went by, and she finally was like, oh wow, this is the furthest I've gotten in a pregnancy, and started just believing in everything. And that was my first success story. I met the baby and I was like, oh my God, I have to keep doing this. Like, how can you not? At that point, you're like, wow, we just contributed to new life on this planet. It's amazing. So, yeah.
So you don't have your
I,
child?
I
You
do
don't have
now.
child? Yeah, you
I
have.
do now. So, yeah, the personal side, I went through a divorce. That marriage was a starter marriage, is what I call it. And I'm really grateful because it really led me to this purpose and passion that I have for women's health and fertility. So I'm ever so grateful for this person. It was the lesson that I needed to get to the path that I needed to be on. And I met my now husband soon after the divorce, and we waited. I had my child at 38, so we waited quite some time before we did that. Um, so yes, I do have a kid now.
Beautiful. So, so many people actually go to this path and they lose child after sequential miscarriages. that
Mhm.
that that was me too.
Mhm.
Speak everything, you think that, oh, you feel healthy, you don't have any problem, you have your regular cycle, so what's happening to me? And then you're asking this question, you go to doctor, and the medical doctor is saying you don't have any problem, but you that was unexpected
Mhm.
infertility, right? So what do you do as a naturopath doctor
Mhm.
to realize these I mean, what kind of question you ask and how do you discover the solution? What do you do?
Yeah, so uh, I think recurrent loss or even one loss is enough for us to ask the question, why did this happen? My assumption is that when two people come together, they want to have a child, that conception can, and sometimes it's okay for it to end in a loss. But the majority of the time, it's the body saying that something is out of whack where I can't support this life to continue growing. And that's when pregnancy loss happens. So, in those cases, I really like to take a step back and say, what could be happening that could lead to a loss? And with losses, there are several different types of losses. So, there's the early, what they call early miscarriage, or even a step further than that is implantation failure. So, either you do IVF or you get pregnant naturally and your period is a few days late but it starts, right? Like it's the day 35, day 36, day 40 bleeds. Those are usually failure to launch is what we call it. Is like it didn't really stick. So implantation failure can happen for several reasons. The biggest reasons are inflammation, like negative inflammation. There's positive inflammation, there's negative inflammation. So the negative type of inflammation will cause essentially the embryo to not stick to the uterine lining thoroughly enough to continue and turn into a child. The other thing that could be happening is kind of autoimmune type things where the body is thinking that this embryo is a foreign object that it needs to mount an immune response to. And it will mount an immune response. And often the embryo is not strong enough to like fight against that. So it ends in a loss. And then the third thing, which may be interrelated with all of this, is the vaginal microbiome. And that's probably the latest and greatest in terms of fertility medicine, because we're realizing that they're the key takeaways for me are like the primary bacteria in our vaginas should be lactobacillus, period. If there are other strains of bacteria, they're probably not supposed to be there. And they're probably up to not so good things. And then you have the microbial diversity, which in the gut, we want a variety. We want as many microbes as we can possibly get. In the vagina, we want as few microbes as we can possibly get. So when you get to 5, 10, 20 microbes in the vagina, you're like, yeah, that's not a great environment for implantation, embryo development, and eventual birth. So the vaginal microbiome then has an impact on the uterus. It's bizarre, it's weird, but it's where we are in medicine. We're realizing that all of these things are playing a role, they're interconnected, and there's probably something happening there. So the vaginal microbiome is pretty crucial. Then we get into the next stage, which is miscarriage between week 6 and week 11, 12. And those are still considered first trimester losses. And often those losses are similar. There's a level of inflammation, there's a level of vaginal microbiome imbalance, but now we have a new factor. And the new factor is the DNA that was originally started the embryo, the female contributor and the male contributor. And the male contributor is often not looked at very much, but often a lot of these men have sperm DNA fragmentation. They have high blood sugar, high insulin, high inflammation, high homocysteine. Those are factors on the male side that are all connected in research to increase the chances of the woman having a pregnancy loss. So often women are going through this stage of like, oh my God, this keeps ending in a loss. Why is this ending in a loss? And no one ever pays attention to the guy because most of these guys have great sperm, right? I put it in quotes because I swear every guy gets told he has great sperm. So I don't understand that, but whatever. A lot of these guys that I'll look at their semen analysis and I'll say, actually, yeah, I agree. They're a great sperm. But if your partner has had multiple losses, I can almost bet money that there is a factor on the guy's side that is making for poor genetic material to start that embryo off in its life. And it will not be able to multiply through the stages of that first trimester to actually form into a little human. So that's the second stage of miscarriage. And then after that, if there's a loss, like second trimester, if there are losses, those are often genetic abnormalities and things like that, which are actually like the body's protective mechanism to create the healthiest baby possible. And often those not so healthy babies, which sometimes are not predictable, will potentially end in a loss.
I love this discussion. A lot of patients, uh, at least they have two miscarriages, at least,
Mhm.
before they come to me or
Mhm.
come to you. And one of the things I see similar to all of them is cold uterus. That,
Mhm.
yeah, they have a lot of even their feet are so cold.
Right.
They don't
Mhm.
have they feel that they are okay because they have regular cycle. But
Mhm.
how can you describe this? And then after this, because I don't want to lose the discussion, I'm going to talk about male fertility.
Mhm.
So yeah, go to this one first. Yeah.
Cold uterus. So that's a very like Chinese medicine term. And I've heard a lot of women come to us and say, "Oh, my acupuncturist said I have a cold uterus." So, what do we do for that? My simplest thing that I would suggest everyone do is castor oil packs. And use the castor oil pack has to go all the way down over your uterus and ovaries. So bring it all the way down, and that helps to warm just naturally the environment that it's covering. So that's probably one of the easiest hacks. By the way, if you're trying to conceive, do not do this in your post ovulation time. It's very, very, very contraindicated. But if you're doing it in your follicular phase, essentially like after your period ends up to ovulation, then it's totally fine. And this will actually help warm the uterus. And if you're on a break from trying, then do it the whole cycle. That's totally fine. Um, so though that is like my easy hack that I think is safe for everyone to do and can actually help build more chi and energy and blood flow to the uterus and ovaries. And then we have other things that we use in our practice. We do things like moxa and laser sessions, and like this is a cold laser that actually brings more blood flow and circulation to the uterus. So all of those things will help. But the other thing is a lot of times women are sitting, right? They're spending so much of their day sitting down. And if you're sitting in this like L figure, you have literally blocked off the blood flow to your uterus. So you just have to get up and move around. If you're moving around like at least 5 minutes every hour, then you're getting blood flow and circulation. Otherwise, you're blocking off the flow, and hence there is no blood to warm the uterus. And that's what leads to this cold womb, cold
What
uterus.
is the causes? What is the cause for
That's
cold?
I'm not a Chinese medicine doctor, so forgive me if I am not correct on this, but the way that I approach it is if you don't have blood flowing through that area, the blood is warming, right? Like blood flows to your skin, all of a sudden you're hot, you're like, what's happening? Um, that's how your body warms itself up. Same thing with cold hands and feet, right? You're not getting enough blood flow and circulation to your hands and feet to actually warm them up. So it's the flow of energy or qi that Chinese medicine would consider, and the flow of blood that will cause you to either be cold or warm in your uterus. And the other thing I would say is the types of foods that we eat. So definitely Chinese medicine is like anti salads and things like that. I think that the way that we approach it is like there are foods that are warming and there are foods that are cooling. And if you were eating, for example, kale is relatively warming. So even if you're eating a kale salad, it should warm you up. Whereas if you eat lettuce, it's going to be cooling. So you can still eat salad for us. Like if your acupuncturist says no, that's your acupuncturist. But for us, you can eat salads. I feel like greens and like vibrant nutrients are great. But you have to process it in the right way. So if you're going to eat kale, it needs to be massaged with a little bit of oil, a little lemon, a little salt, and like warm it up. Work that kale until it's like amazing, vibrant green. That makes it a warm food, even though you didn't cook it. So there's little like workarounds and hacks, but in general, you have to eat warming foods, right? You have to eat stews and soups and things like that that will help to warm the uterus. So if you're eating salad every single meal, it's probably not a good idea.
So, this is a very long discussion, so I'm not going to go there because we
Mhm.
talk about this in so many interviews. But if people like to know about that, yeah, they can refer to my book, Naturally Conceive. We talk about this warm foods and cold foods. Because in Persian culture, on Persian, we have cold and warm nature
Mhm.
food.
Mhm.
Not, I'm not talking about the warm as a temperature.
You're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
warm.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
walnut is
Same.
warm. Is a very. It has lots of energy.
Yeah.
Uh, Pistachios and walnut, this kind of thing.
Mhm.
But let's say lotus it has a cold nature, or
Mhm.
cucumber has a cold nature. They are good, but you shouldn't take too many of them. Even for the
Ex
warm food, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
just have a balance. So let's get back to male fertility. This is
Mhm.
my favorite subject because, as I'm saying, most of the women come to me and they talk about their problem. Usually, when we talk, we ask them to bring um, their another half of them, and they say, "Oh, there is nothing," and we can just go from there. So, do you think in medical laboratories or medicine, they only take a few labs or few um, tests on men? What are
Mhm.
those, and what extra tests you do on them?
Mhm. So in general, this is what I've noticed, and every doctor is different, every clinic is different. But in general, most guys come in with a semen analysis if we're lucky, and they as a couple may have done some sort of genetic testing to make sure that they don't have a mismatch of genes that could potentially cause essentially like genetic diseases. Outside of that, I don't see the men being tested for almost anything. And I think that there's about 15 to 20 tests that we like to see on all the guys. So we do HSCRP, which is a inflammatory marker, homocysteine, another inflammatory marker, blood sugar, insulin, those need to be fasting, cholesterol or lipid panel, also fasting. And then thyroid, believe it or not, lots of guys have thyroid issues. It's not just a male female problem. And and then we will liver enzymes tend often to be out of balance in men because liver, not to generalize to this, but often men have consumed more alcohol over their lifespan than women. That's just the reality. So they'll often have high liver enzymes, which essentially is a red flag because if you have high liver enzymes, then your liver is not processing toxins very well. So, guess what happens to those toxins? They build up in your system and they're going to have an impact on the sperm and the DNA of the sperm, regardless of whether it shows on a semen analysis or not. So I think that the blood panel is vital for men. It's the bare minimum, right? Like there's a whole host of tests that we can do, but that's where we start because we know that these are going to point to potentially deeper things that we need to dive into. So, for example, if homocysteine is elevated, then we usually will do an epigenetic screen where we're testing 100 something SNPs on guys, and we can really say like, oh, you have this specific epigenetic mutation, which is then going to contribute to high homocysteine and crappy sperm. Whether or not we see it, it's still present. So and I have to keep saying that because they're like the belief system with men is like, oh, but my sperm are great. And I'm like, yes, your sperm are great on what's visible through a microscope. Unfortunately, that's not a lot. So it's not the end all be all, the sperm test. And a lot of doctors have made men to believe, like, oh, yeah, nothing else matters because your sperm are great. Well, yeah, if you're pre diabetic, you're passing that off to the child. And it's having some effect. And there are luckily now, since 2017, 2018, there have been studies coming out about how some of these factors in men actually have contributed to pregnancy losses or unhealthy pregnancies, whereas it has always been believed previously that, oh, it's always the woman. Whatever happens after pregnancy, it's just the woman. But now we know that there are other factors and it's being passed somewhere. We will figure out what those things are eventually, or science will figure it out. But those factors are present and we know that they're having some impact. We don't know how it's being passed through. We don't know exactly the details. How come we don't see it on the semen analysis? Doesn't matter. It's like just do the blood test, right?
Yeah.
And once you do the blood test, and
Yeah,
you
because
have
the
more
blood test,
information.
even from the medical side, they can, um, I mean, I'm talking about the conventional medicine, they can talk about this, but usually all the tests are normal, usually.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know from the
Oh, yeah.
naturopath doctors and functional medicine
Yeah.
is a bit different because we
Yeah.
go through the optimal range
That's a
and
good point.
yeah,
That's a good point. I always forget to say that because, most yeah, even if you did all of these blood tests, if you didn't have a functional medicine person interpreting them for you, then you're not gonna have the info, uh,
you miss so
that
many
yeah.
things. You miss it. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, until you're diabetic is not an issue. Until you
Uh,
have some disease,
until you
it's
have
not
a
an issue.
symptom. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. 'Cause I can see your LinkedIn here, and then you have Facebook. I didn't put your website here, but that should be the Holistic Fertility Doctor. Is that your website?
No, so our Instagram, we're on Instagram and TikTok as at Holistic Fertility Doctor, and then our website is holisticfertilityinstitute.com.
But you have everything on your Instagram account,
Yeah,
yes?
we do. Yeah.
Okay. So, and tell me about your book. I'm very excited. I know I've seen your book, and I really want to talk about this.
Yeah.
What was your book about, and what did you highlight there?
So, Fertility Secrets, what your doctor didn't tell you about baby making. And I essentially go through the process that I have created for people that are on this journey to go step by step, right? Everyone wants the good stuff. They're like, just give me the pill. No, right? So, the way that we envision it is that it's a pyramid, and you have to lay the foundation if you're going to get to the top. You have to climb through every step. You can't just have a helicopter land you on the top. It doesn't work that way. So, the four steps that we go through are reveal, remove, rebalance, and receive. So, reveal is let's uncover everything that's happening under the surface. And the terminology is a little different in the book because I've kept evolving it, even though the book came out only a few years ago. So 6 years ago. Yeah. So, um, we are the terminology is a little different, the concepts are exactly the same. So reveal is all about let's really figure out what's going on. There is always a reason, right? People will always come in and say, oh, I have unexplained infertility. I'm like, what does that mean? Your doctor was lazy? Like, that's the only explanation I have for that. Or they don't know, but always there's a reason. If your body is not doing this vital function of reproduction, there's a reason for it. So, reveal, let's figure out what it is. Remove is get rid of all the garbage that's in the way of you being able to get pregnant and stay pregnant. Rebalance is addressing all of the underlying things that we figured out. So, we might figure out, like, oh, you have mold in your house, that's affecting your hormones. You have gut inflammation, vaginal microbiome is off, whatever, like whole bunch of things that we might figure out. Then we put all of those pieces in a plan or a strategy to start rebalancing every single one of those. And then the last piece is, the last piece of the rebalance is getting to the egg quality and the sperm quality. So everyone jumps to that. But if you haven't done all of this other work, you can take all the supplements in the world for egg quality and sperm quality. They're not going to do anything because the inflammation still exists, the hormones are still out of whack, all the other things are still under the surface happening. So that's a rebalance. And then receive is probably the most woo woo, but the most fun for me is really the connection between the mind and the body. And that's how our mental, emotional, spiritual state is affecting our ability to conceive And if I were to summarize it, I've tried to like put this in lots of different contexts. The way that I think about it the best is a lot of women specifically have created, because our culture has created this paradigm where we need to do, achieve, do all the great things, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the women struggling with fertility are type A, high achieving women that really have shifted into more of their masculine energy than their feminine. So if we can help them shift even a little bit into the feminine where they can quote unquote relax. This is never advice that I give people. Just relax. That's going to get you pregnant. It's more like an internal shift of relaxation. And we can reframe that word to mean more of I trust my body and I have complete non-wavering faith that I can get pregnant and stay pregnant and have a healthy baby.
Surrender.
Surrender. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's the shift from that masculine energy to the feminine energy. And it's almost always like if women are able to get to that state, they will almost always get pregnant. Almost always.
Almost always.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I really want to continue, but uh, we are almost
We're
finished.
at time.
Yeah, yeah. I that was lovely to have you. To be honest, it was a long time I was going to have you here, and especially we talk about male fertility, which was amazing. So just let other people know that Dr. Aumatma yeah, actually helped a lot of couples so far to get conceived, and she actually worked with a team, right? As I
Yeah.
saw your
Yeah.
team.
Mhm.
So she's not the only one. There are a lot of people. They, as a team, they work with you. And if you want to find out, go to her uh, Instagram and Facebook.
Mhm. Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody. We're glad to have you. And thank you for having me on your
Thank you
amazing.
so much. Hopefully, I can have you. Oh my goodness. Hopefully, I can have you in other summits and interviews.
Thank you.
Please subscribe to Panta Calhor Transition channel and order my book Naturally Conceived through Amazon. Thank you for watching.